Hey guys, this is CodeFights Arcade Intro. Task number 21 is IPv4 address. And we're given a description over here of what an IPv4 address is. And we're going to make a function that accepts an input and returns whether or not it is an IPv4 address. So meaning an IPv4 address is represented in dot decimal, consists of 4 decimal numbers ranging from 0 to 255 inclusive, separated by dots. So an IPv4 address looks like this. And that's great. We have some pretty strict qualifications for what makes an IPv4 address, and we just really need to check against those. And then this problem, I'll tell you right now, just does have one little sort of trick that has to do with a JavaScript convention, and we'll go over that. So let's get started. First, we're going to make a little helper function down here. We want to just check, we want to see if any of our, if each one of these segments is a number ranging from 0 to 255 inclusive. So that's easy for us to do. We're going to make a helper function, and we'll call that is.decimal range. Is each of these in the range of a dot decimal notation? And we'll just say if n is greater than or equal to 0, because it's 0 through 255 inclusive, and n is less than or equal to 255, we want to return true. Otherwise, we want to return false. Great. And so this is going to be our checker function. We'll go over that. So we want to take our input string, and we have a string like this. We want to break that into an array, and that's going to be the easiest way for us to access each one of these values individually. So we'll split it at the period. We'll say const input array. It's the array we'll make out of our input string equals input string dot split. And we're going to split it at the period like that. And if you don't know, this split helper function is really useful for just taking a string and you split it at whatever input you put here. It's going to split the string at that character, not inclusive. So it's going to split into an array that is, in this case, 172, 16, 254, and 1. And then one more thing we want to check for to make sure it's an IPv4 address. An IPv4 address has 4 decimal numbers. So we can just say if our input array dot length equals 4, because that's a condition it's got to have to be an IPv4 address. Then we want to check one more thing. And here we're going to use the every helper function on an array. And what every does is it takes a checker function, in our case it's this is.decimal range, and it runs that over every value in our array. And if every value returns true for the array, then every is going to return true. And if not every value in our array returns true, if any one of them returns false, then every is going to return false out of here. So we'll say input array dot every, and we'll pass our helper function is.decimal range to run over each value in that array. And then we'll just return this. So that's going to return true if everything is in that dot decimal, and it's going to return false if not. And then otherwise, in case our input array dot length doesn't even equal 4, then we're just going to return false right away, because that's not going to be an IPv4 address. So we're almost there. There's that one little trick I mentioned. Let's just run our test and see what happens. So you see our tests are running. They're passing on pretty much everything. Let's try to figure out in these cases where it's not passing what's going on here. So we see in this one our input string, it looks like they're only passing in 3 different values here. Is that the problem? But we checked for that length equals 4. So what's going on there? Let's check this other one out. In this one, 0 dot, there's nothing in there, so it's going to split at the dots. I wonder what that gives us when it splits at the dots. There's nothing in there. Let's find out. We'll console log our input array and see how that is ending up in these cases. Let's run our test again. So see on this one, when we're splitting at the dots and there's nothing in front of that dot, it's giving us back an empty string here as one of these values. I bet the other one's doing something similar. Again, in between the dots, there's nothing there. It's giving us this empty string. It's splitting at the dots, and in between them is an empty string. And this is where I talked about a convention in JavaScript. In JavaScript, something that is confusing coming from other languages for a lot of people, but is actually a really powerful feature of JavaScript, is JavaScript will force type conversions. So if you're comparing numbers to letters and something like that, or null values to true or false values to Boolean values, it'll force these types. It'll convert them so that it can make that comparison instead of just passing back an error saying I can't make that comparison. It'll force the types into something. And in this case, what's going on here is this empty string actually compares, is forced to a 0 value. So an empty string ends up evaluating in JavaScript to 0 when you're checking it in this case. So that's why these are coming out true when the expected output is false, because this is passing all our tests. It's running over this empty string, and it's saying, passing the empty string in right here, saying empty string is greater than or equal to 0, and that in that case the empty string value is converted to 0, and so empty string, when that conversion is greater than or equal to 0, that's true. So it's going to pass out of here, pass up to this function here, every's going to run, it's going to pass every time, and then we're going to output a true value when really it should be false. This is obviously not an IPv4 address. Anything with an empty string we're not going to want as an IPv4 address. So what we can do here is add another condition into our checker function, and we'll just say and this is the not equal to sign, is not equal to an empty string. So our number has to be in between 0 to 255 exclusive, and it can't be an empty string. We could also check in case, just in case, actually letters are not going to evaluate to 0 in the same way as an empty string, but we can check for, just to write really safe code, we'll say there's a function isNan is not a number, and we can pass in x to, or n to that. And when you pass in a number to isNan, it's going to tell us is this input not a number? And so we want to say is not a number, if that makes sense. Kind of confusing, runs more safe code in case any of the values in here end up being some value that's not a number. For it to be an IPv4 address, we want to accept a number. So just to prevent any of these weird type conversions happening, we're going to put that in there. And let's run our tests. Oh, sorry. We need to put and n is not equal to an empty string, and is not a number. Here we go. All our tests are passing. So don't worry too much about this is not a number. If that doesn't make too much sense to you, the main thing here is learning these JavaScript conventions and how JavaScript converts different types when it's comparing them. And that's something that can definitely throw you off at first, but you'll learn that that becomes a really powerful tool, so we don't always have to convert types on our own, and we can end up writing a lot of simple, like one-line code based on values returning truthy or falsy once we know how those conventions work. So that's it for isIPv4 address. Thanks for watching.